They weren't really protecting her privacy because she was already passed away, and they weren't treating her with any respect anyway because they weren't giving any money. So some people think it was an accident. Other people think it was not giving credit where credit was due and trying to hide it.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Trevor Craig, and I'm a scientist.
Hi, I'm Brittany Hansen, and I'm a pop culture enthusiast. And this is Okay, But Why, a Microbac Laboratories podcast about science and pop culture.
Hi, I'm Trevor, and I'm a scientist.
Hi, I'm Brittany, and I'm a pop culture enthusiast. And this is Okay, But Why, a science and pop culture-based podcast hosted by Microbac.
Hi, Brittany.
Hello.
This is first time we recorded in person.
Yes.
And probably, the second time we've seen each other in person?
Second or third.
Yeah.
And we're on episode 10.
Episode 10, good job.
Yes.
I completely lost track how many episodes we've done.
Yes.
And it is our first video recordings, too.
Yes.
Normally when we record, we are always in video, but we don't publish the videos, so now we have to do the videos. So it's a little bit different today.
Yeah.
So it'll be a change.
Yeah, we're bringing science to Miami.
Yes, we are in Miami, it's my first time in Miami.
Yes.
You've been here a few times, you said.
Many times. Some of which I can't remember.
That's, I think, how you're supposed to go to Miami. I think that's the rule for going to Miami.
Yes.
And we both got here last night. So we're fresh and in a really cool part of the city.
Exactly.
And now we get to do this. So
yeah.
What else is going on in your life?
Well, not a lot. I'm just really looking forward to what our topic is for this week.
It's a good one. As per usual, it's pretty sad
in
some parts of it.
Keep it
but this
light.
One does have a better beginning at the end, or better end, I guess.
Okay.
So it does start to feel a little bit more hopeful at the end.
Okay.
Okay. So you ready to get into it?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay. So today's topic is Henrietta Lacks and her immortal cell line. Have you ever heard of Henrietta Lacks or HeLa cells?
Henrietta Lacks.
Yes.
No. Okay. We might need to slow that down.
Yes. So her name is Henrietta Lacks, and a cell line was pulled from her. And we'll talk about why it's important, but it's basically changed everybody's lives.
Okay.
Yes. And there's a really sad reason that you don't know who she is.
Okay.
This story, I will say, has a personal connection with me and my grad work. I worked with this cell line. And I did some of the work that we are going to talk about today, and I am on a couple of the patents that we're going to talk about today.
Okay, a lot of big words. So let's start with cell line. What do you mean by that?
So everyone's body is made up of cells.
Okay.
And there's different cells that do different functionalities throughout your body. So, skin cells, bone cells, immune system cells. Henrietta Lacks had a specific type of cell that was isolated in her body that is immortal, meaning that it never dies and it constantly replicates.
Okay.
But we'll talk about why that's important, why that's weird, and why it killed her.
Okay. Let's jump into it.
Okay. So
the name, is it Henry? Can you
Henrietta?
Henrietta
Lacks.
Lacks. So it's for her first and last name.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. So let me go back to a little bit of history. So we're starting in the 50s, and science was struggling doing some research on human disease because they had no human cell lines that could grow outside of a human body for more than a couple days.
Okay.
This is a problem because you need cell lines to do experiments on.
Okay.
And we've never been able to do this. We could replicate it in mice and apes, I believe they were able to do it, but they weren't able to do it in human cells.
Okay.
We've been trying to do this for decades at this point, if not hundreds of years, basically since the start of science. This makes it really difficult because we can't study the full treatments. So if you have a cell line and you're trying to see if a treatment works on it, at that point, the only thing you could do is give it to a person who is already sick with the disease.
Okay.
But that treatment could be confounded by a ton of different things, what they're eating, how much water they're drinking, the areas they're living in. So you can't tell whether the treatment's actually helping or whether something else is happening, which we still have that issue today.
Sure.
We need this to study how diseases develop in a cell, how cell functions work, and all those things have to be repeated and done over and over and over, not just in a single laboratory, but between scientists, between laboratories across the world. Without having a repeatable cell line, we are unable to do that because if I use a set of cells, they die in 3 days.
Yep.
The next cells I use aren't the same cells. The cells that this lab's using aren't the same cells. So we can't compare apples to apples, basically.
Okay.
So that's where the problem is, where we're at right now. In 1951, George Guy, a scientist and the head of tissue culture at Johns Hopkins, receives a cell culture from a tumor that's really strange to his lab. The cells are dark purple, they're shiny, and they're jelly-like. They grow quickly. They aren't limited in how many times they can split. And when one cell dies, it is replaced by hundreds of daughter generations. So there's a mother cell.
Yep.
It splits into 2 cells. Those 2 cells split into 2 more cells. And the way this one works is it's replicating so fast, and they are perfect copies, that they are actually double and tripling within days.
Okay.
So this is a huge
So
finding.
he received abnormal cells.
Yes.
Okay.
And they know it came from a tumor.
Okay.
He starts talking to his fellow scientists, and he says he thinks he's found the first immortal cell line, and they're basically like, prove it, send me some.
Right.
And he sends them all over the world. And within a couple of years, there is the first facility that is mass producing these cells, and they're producing, hold on, I gotta check my notes, 6 trillion of these cells a day.
What?
The cells are called HeLa. They
Okay.
are named HeLa, and they are named after Henrietta Lacks, who is the first 2 letters of her first name, the first 2 letters of her last name.
Okay.
These cells end up changing the world because we were able to do all these experiments on them and all this research on them. Over the next decades, and they are still used to today, they were used for the polio vaccine. They have the first cells that were sent to space. It's actually the first person, technically, that's been to space.
Whoa.
They were sent into space before anyone else. They were used in cancer medications. They were the first cells cloned. They were used for the first mapping of genes.
Oh my gosh.
They are used in vitro fertilization. Almost all vaccines go back to the HeLa cells. They are used to study measles, mumps, HIV, Ebola, and COVID. We know human cells have 46 chromosomes because of HeLa. HeLa itself has about 80 mutations in those chromosomes.
Whoa.
Telomerase, which is an enzyme that is found in cancer cells that basically mask that they're cancer cells, was first discovered, and that's why we can identify cancer now.
Yes.
As because we were looking for this. And we eventually find out that cervical cancer can be caused by a virus called HPV because of HeLa cells. My undergrad research and my grad research was in HPV and in developing the vaccine that is used for HPV.
Okay, so the cells came from her, and they were from a tumor that she had.
Yes.
And now all of those cells were used to create all of this.
Yes.
And this is the only person that's had these type of cells?
Yes.
Whoa.
Yes.
Okay.
Or at least she was the first one that they were identified, and this
Okay.
is the strain that they continue to use.
Okay.
All of this was done without the knowledge of Henrietta Lacks or her family. They had no idea that these cells were taken from her and are used for all this science. And none of this was ever sent back to her. None of this research is credited to her at the time. And none of the money generated from this was ever credited to her.
What? Why?
Let's get into the story.
Okay.
Okay. So before we go into that, let's talk about cancer cells. And the reason I talk about this is I think almost everyone probably has a close connection to cancer.
Yes.
They know someone who has cancer. They may have lost someone who has cancer. They may have fought cancer themselves. But I don't think people really understand what it means when you say you have cancer.
Right.
So normal human cells divide around 50 times before they basically self-destruct. And they do this because as they divide, they're making genetic copies each time, and those genetic copies can get mutations in them.
Sure.
And so your body says, before we have too many mutations, and those mutations get copied over and over, and then those mutations get mutations, and those mutations get mutations, we kill the cells, and then a new cell comes in there.
Sure.
It is why we age, because eventually your cells are running out. There's not new cells to replace them. And cells all over your body do this. So the outside of your skin is actually a layer of dead cells that slough off.
Yep.
And the live cell is the one that's really, really deep.
Okay.
And that one's splitting. And as it splits, they move to the surface. They protect you from UV. They keep your body in a skin bag. It's kind of important.
Yes.
And that is usually where you see the most cancer, or more commonly cancer is found in your skin cells because they divide so often because of that.
Yep. So those are different versions of skin cancer.
Yes.
Okay.
And that happens throughout your body. All your cells divide. Some of them divide throughout your entire life. Some of them divide very slowly. Some of them divide very quickly. Some of them are limited on how many times they can divide. Stem cells are cells that can divide indefinitely, and they can turn into anything.
Okay.
And one day we'll do an episode on stem cells, because I was going to add it to this, and then it was like another 13 pages. And I was like, we'll just make that its own episode.
Very interesting.
Okay. Almost all lines of your body can form cancer, and the way they name cancer is by where it forms.
Yes.
And the different terms that come with cancer is how it moves around. So you can have cancer that is formed in a single part of your body, and what happens is these cancer cells have hijacked the system, and they just don't stop dividing.
Okay.
And they continue to have mutations. A single mutation won't cause you to have cancer. You need at least, I think, 10 or 12 before the cells can start to form cancer. But they can have hundreds of mutations. Like, it's not really limited on how many they can have. And normally your body is able to say, hey, this cell's not acting right. Your immune system kills it, or it's just killed off naturally.
Yep.
Cancer cells use specific genes like telomerase to hide that they have problems. And so your body doesn't recognize them as a foreign body.
Yep.
Or it infects the things that are essentially going to kill off the cancer cells.
Sure.
So they form tumors, which is just a large mass of these cells, and they suck up nutrients from your body, and they can move around your body and cause problems. Basically, anywhere they land where they can find the right nutrients to grow, they can form a tumor.
So I think the burning question, because obviously, like you said, cancer has affected a lot of people, and everyone's wondering why we don't have a cure for cancer. So the idea of figuring out a cure is figuring out why these mutations are happening and where does it like tie back to?
So the hard part with curing cancer is they're your cells.
Okay.
There are differences, obviously, but your body doesn't always recognize them as being a disease, so it doesn't destroy them. So in order to get rid of them, you have to do something that kills those cancer cells, which also kills your good, healthy cells.
And that's like basically chemo?
Yes.
Okay.
So there's lots of, radiation will kill all cells. Chemo can be focused. And then they have like silver bullets, was what they call them, or specific medications that are targeted to certain types of cells. But they don't always just pick the cancer. We're getting better at doing that, but it's not always perfect. And I mean, if you've ever met anyone who's gone through chemo or radiation, they're often sick because it's killing lots of cells, not just the cancer cells.
Yeah. I think everyone talks about like the importance of catching cancer soon, but like you said, your body sometimes masks that. So maybe that's why it's difficult to know that you have cancer. Some people go maybe years before they find out, and then it's too late.
Yeah, and really aggressive cancers. And Henrietta Lacks' cancer was extremely aggressive. They think it probably took months, and it only took her maybe, I think, a year before it killed her.
What kind of cancer did she have?
She had cervical cancer.
Oh, sad.
And we'll get into more detail about her, because she's really the star of this. I mean, we're talking about cancer now, but that's the bad part, and then we're going to move into some little happier things.
Okay, let's do that.
The other thing about cancer is these mutations can be caused by lots of things. We talk about that they naturally happen, but they can be influenced by chemicals, your environment. So we talk about carcinogens, or things that could basically cause mutations in cells that cause cancerous.
Sure.
So just to talk about things, because when I was in like early college, early grad school, my grandfather had cancer, and he is an old guy. He didn't want to ask the doctor any questions. He was like, oh, okay, let me know what I need to do. Let's set up our next appointment.
Yeah.
And then he came home. He's like, they told me this. What does any of this mean? He was afraid to ask it. So I wanted to talk about this because in case people are afraid to ask, they can get it here.
Perfect.
Carcinoma is the majority of cell types, and these are caused by epithelial, and that's normally the tissues that line the outer or inner parts of your body. So skin cancer.
Sure.
Leukemia originate from tissues responsible for producing new blood cells, and this is most associated with bone cancer. Or bone marrow.
Yep.
Lymphoma and myeloma derive from cells that are your immune system, so your lymph nodes and stuff like that. That they talk about lymph nodes. It got to your lymph nodes and it spreads throughout your body.
Yeah.
Sarcoma originate from connective tissues, including fat, muscle, and bone. The central nervous system can get its own type of cancer. That's brain cancer, and it could be a lot of different ones.
Sure.
And mesothelioma is one you ever see the commercials for.
Yeah.
And those are the linings of your body cavities. So it's not always your lung. Like when we say mesothelioma, people think it's lung cancer. It's actually the tissues that surround your lung that get the cancer.
Okay. I have two thoughts.
Yes.
So my grandma passed away from Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Yes.
So that was in her lymph nodes. What does the Hodgkin's part stand for?
Normally the specific names have to do with either people it was identified or people it was identified by.
Okay. And then my second question, obviously we're just getting off of Breast Cancer Awareness Month.
Yes.
What type of cancer is that? I know that's very common.
Breast cancer, I believe, are epithelial cancer cells.
Okay.
I'm not entirely sure, but there's also a ton of them because it's connective tissue.
Sure.
So you probably are talking about, let's see, sarcomas, which are the ones that are mostly connective tissue because it's things like fat, muscle, bone, those types of things.
Okay.
And then you can have benign tumors, which do not move throughout your body and often don't have a negative effect. They can be easily removed. We talk about benign skin lesions and stuff like that. It doesn't hurt anything. And then you can have malignant tumors, which can invade other organs or spread to different locations, which is called metastasis.
Okay.
And they become life-threatening.
Sure.
Oh, there are also viruses that cause cancers.
Oh.
So there are viruses infect cells, and they hijack the cell to make more viruses.
Okay.
And sometimes in the process of doing that, they can also make the cells massively multiply.
Yikes.
And that causes cancer. So when we talk about HPV, that is
I
a
was gonna
virus
ask.
that can cause cancers.
Okay.
Yes.
Is there any other ones that people would know of? I know that's
probably
a
not off
common
the top of
one.
your head. There's
Okay.
a lot of ones out there, though.
Okay.
Most of the time, it's a subset of what the virus is doing. The virus
Sure.
is just looking to replicate. In the process of, viral DNA enters the cell DNA,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how it starts to replicate. In the process of it doing that, it also causes some mutations, which can lead to cancer. So it's not the virus going in there and starting cancer.
Yep.
It's a subset of what happens because of the virus.
Okay. One other question.
Yes.
Cancer, a lot of people are curious if it's hereditary. So like my mom had cancer, my grandma had cancer. Am I going to have cancer?
Well, maybe not.
Okay.
They know that the genetics that you get sometimes lead to having those mutations when your cells are copied.
Okay.
So there's the one that's often linked to breast cancer, and I'm blanking on its name off the top of my head. But they know that if you have that, you have like an 85% chance of developing breast cancer.
Okay.
And now insurance companies, you can get tested for that genetic marker, and they will just cover for you to have a full mastectomy and
Sure.
get new boobs, whatever you want.
Yeah.
Because it's cheaper for them to do it now than wait for you to get sick from cancer later on.
Okay.
And it's almost like a guarantee that you will.
So be proactive.
Yes.
Okay. You heard it here, folks.
Yes, do it. And a lot of companies, insurance companies, will pay for you to get the testing too.
Okay.
So they go through that one. I over COVID had a cancer scare. I had like a formation in one of my lungs, and it
my
actually,
gosh.
I just have like a little thing that's in my lung.
Sure.
But I had a grandparent who had lung cancer who
Okay.
never smoked in their life. So I was like, oh my gosh, it's genetic.
Here we go.
I've got it. It's
Oh my
not
gosh.
cancer. I just have a weird thing that's in my lung.
Okay.
But it was a scary couple months of
course.
COVID because I started coughing all the time, and I never tested positive for COVID, and I didn't have COVID.
Yeah.
But no, I had like a little thing that was in my lung. It was
Okay.
It was weird because it's COVID, so it took me like months to get into the hospital to get the
Yeah.
testing and everything for it, and they seemed really like fine with it. Part of that.
You're like, excuse me, I have lung cancer.
Yeah, I was like, I might have lung cancer. Originally, they thought I had breast cancer.
Whoa,
So-
can men
Yes,
get?
because
I didn't know that.
we have the same tissues. It's
Okay.
not as common, but I had to go get a mammogram.
Whoa.
And I am fairly small, so like this didn't work for me. And then they had to like take X-rays, and they had to do it specifically. So I went to this place to get a mammogram and these X-rays, and it was all these old ladies and me, and they had to take
You're
these
like, "Hey,
photos.
Grammy."
I was like, "What's up, ladies?" But they had, like put like a little thing over your nipple so they can tell like your nipple tissue different from the rest of your tissues.
Okay.
And they're like a little sticker, and they try to make them all cute and flowery. And I was like, this is kind of weird. But okay,
little feminine.
like a little feminine for me. But no, nothing. It was nothing. It turns out, but it was
Okay,
still had to go
great.
through that. But it happens to a lot of people.
Okay.
Okay. So any other questions about cancer?
I think that covers it. I just need to schedule a mammogram now.
Yes. Don't put it off.
Okay.
Okay, so let's talk about Henrietta Lacks and these cells.
Okay.
So giving some history on Henrietta Lacks, and I want to spend more time talking about her and her family, even though the cells are kind of the science behind the
Yep.
story. So much of her life was kind of erased because the cells overshadowed her.
Okay.
So I want to talk about that a lot.
Wait, you said she was alive in the 1950s?
Yes.
Okay. And she had a tumor.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so Henrietta Lacks was born Loretta Pleasant on October 1st, 1920, and she died on October 4th, 1951. She was an African-American woman whose cancer cells were the source of the HeLa cell line. And it's the first immortal cell line in humans. It is used for tons of research, but she was not given any credit for any of this research. She started off really early in her life. She was living in Roanoke, Virginia, and she was remembered as having hazel eyes, a small waist, size 6 shoes, and she was always wearing red nail polish and a neatly pleated skirt, which I think is a really nice description
she
of someone.
sounds beautiful.
They don't know how her name changed from Loretta to Henrietta, but her nickname was Henny, which I also think is really cute.
Aw, Henny.
When she was 4 years old, her mother died, giving birth to her 10th child. So she had a lot of siblings.
Oh my gosh.
And unable to care for her after her mother's died, her father moves the family to Clover, Virginia, and the children are distributed amongst family members. So the
my
family doesn't
gosh.
stay together.
Well, I can imagine a dad trying to raise
Yes.
10 children.
Well, and this is also, this is right after a lot of civil rights issues,
Yep.
not even all the civil rights issues. They're sharecroppers. They're working on tobacco. They don't have a lot of money. Like putting all this together is really, really difficult.
Sure.
And she ended up with her maternal grandmother or grandfather, Thomas Henry Lacks, and they lived in a 2-story log cabin that was once slave quarters on a plantation. And the cabin was owned by Henrietta's white great-grandfather and great-uncle.
Well, that answers your question.
Yes.
That's how her name got Henry, because her grandpa's name was Henry.
Yes. So it's like some stuff kind of moved around there.
Okay. He was like, I'm naming you because I'm your mother now.
Yes. She lived with her 9-year-old first cousin and future husband, David Day Lacks. Yeah.
Okay.
She married her cousin and she lived on them.
All right.
Like most members of her family, she worked on a tobacco farm. Starting from an early age, she fed animals, tended the garden, and toiled in tobacco fields. So she wasn't working somewhere where she was exposed to a lot of things that are considered carcinogens. So they don't really know where her cancer came from. There's a lot of theories. They don't even know how her cancer really works still to this day.
Lately, we've been hearing a lot about carcinogens that cause cancer. Can you give some examples of what a carcinogen is?
So a carcinogen is any chemical that essentially is going to cause extra mutations to happen in these cells.
Okay.
And it's really difficult because everything is a carcinogen if you put it in high enough amounts.
Okay.
So
give like a common example of what we might be consuming today that could be a carcinogen.
Well, I can't even think of a specific chemical. Everything's linked to a carcinogen.
Don't scare us.
I know. I'm sorry. One of the things they add to food is maltodextrin, and people have said maltodextrin is a carcinogen.
Okay.
But the studies that show maltodextrin causes cancer have been when they've been like massively feeding it, and that's the only thing an animal eats.
Okay.
Then they develop cancer.
Okay.
Radiation is a carcinogen.
Okay.
Like it's not something you eat, but something you're exposed to. Lead can be a carcinogen.
Okay.
Those heavy metals that we worry about, all those
Sure.
can cause problems.
What about what's in cigarettes that everyone says causes cancer?
It's the smoke,
Okay.
actually. So they talk about this with the vaping, which maybe we should do an episode about vaping eventually.
Yeah.
That it's not actually the tobacco that makes you sick or the nicotine that makes you sick. It's the inhalation of the smoke.
Okay.
Because the burning is that smoke is a carcinogen and the chemicals that come off of there.
Makes sense.
The big carcinogens we talk about all the time are pesticides. There's a good
Okay.
example.
There you go.
That exposure to pesticides in high amounts can be causing cancer.
Sure.
What gets distilled from that is if you have any exposure to a pesticide, it can cause cancer, and that's just not the way it works.
Yeah.
The people who are most at risk are the people who are handling it on a day-to-day basis.
Okay.
Or they're spraying it, they're inhaling it. What's on your food and what's washed off your food is most likely not enough to cause a mutation that's going to be happening.
Okay.
Because these mutations are already happening in your body.
Sure.
There's lots of people who have cancer and they've never been exposed to a lot of these things.
Okay.
And cancer has existed long before. Cancer is one of the oldest diseases we know. They
Sure.
called it a lot of things.
Yeah.
But we know it's been around forever. So it just kind of happens in your body. But these carcinogens can make it happen a little bit more frequently.
So if I was freaking out about trying to avoid pesticides, I know there's like controversy about eating things that are organic or not. Do you have an opinion on like if it's that much more healthy or not?
So they have shown that people who eat more organic lifestyles tend to live longer.
Okay.
But organic is a very broad term.
Sure.
And it's not well regulated. So someone could say, oh, this is organic, and they're using natural pesticides.
Okay.
Well,
But there's still pesticides.
There's still
in there.
pesticides. And
Okay.
how do you determine what's a natural pesticide and what's a not natural pesticide?
Okay.
And I don't believe the last time I heard this, cases of cancer and illnesses like those are not, there's not a differentiation between people who eat organic and people who don't eat organic.
Okay.
So the general belief is if you eat organic, you're probably focused more on your health, which means you're probably working out, you're probably drinking more water, you're probably you're doing those things that you need to do that are
Eating
good
your
for your
fruits
body.
and veggies.
Yes. You're probably not smoking.
Yes.
Those types of things are actually, that whole lifestyle is going to make you live longer. If you just say, I only eat organic foods. And
But you also smoke and drink and
it's
don't
not
work
going to do
out.
anything. Yeah.
Okay.
So like it's got to be a balance of all those things. And
Sure.
we've talked about this recently. They talk about the blue zones, or those areas around the world where people lived past 100.
Yep.
And they were trying to figure out what's in their diet and what are they doing in their life. Well, they've basically found out that a lot of that could have been people lying and saying someone was alive when they weren't and taking their income.
I thought for sure you were going to say it's because they were living off the land and super healthy.
No. And some of the blue zones have been debated whether they were a political movement.
Interesting.
Like the blue zone in the U.S., there is no evidence to say that those people are living longer with less disease than any
Where
other
was
people.
the blue zone in the U.S.?
It is, I can't even think of the name of the city. It's somewhere that you've never heard of.
Oh, do you know like what area of the U.S.?
I think it's in Virginia. I want to say it's in Virginia.
Virginia. Okay.
But the whole thing was, these people are living longer. There's one in Japan. There's one in South Italy. South Italy, the Mediterranean diet was based off the blue.
Okay.
And now they don't think that it's true.
What?
They actually think a lot of those people were saying these people were alive so they could collect their checks, and they were actually dead.
I mean, I don't know if you've ever been to Europe, but I can understand why people live longer there.
Yeah. But like some of the places that have like the longest, like they used to say the one in Japan was because they ate a bunch of tube vegetables like yams and
Yep.
stuff. Research has shown that they actually Japan, they eat the least amount of those.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
So the whole thing here is basically organic. It's really hard to say what's making people live
Sure.
longer or not live longer. It might just be a healthier lifestyle.
Yeah. Every year I feel like there's a new diet that people are trying. There's the carnivore diet, and then there's this diet, and this is better for you. And
Yeah,
I feel like everybody's body is different too. Like what's really good for me, like my best friend, she might not do well on. So it's just funny.
We talked about this personally, that your microbiome has a lot to do with what nutrients you absorb and how your body breaks down food, because your body itself doesn't break down all food and absorb all nutrients. You need this other bacteria in your body. And if your bacteria is different than my bacteria, which they almost always are, we're not going to take food in the same way.
Yeah.
We have different metabolisms and all those types of things too. So the dieting thing doesn't work. But yesterday when I was flying here, I actually listened to a podcast and they talked about all these diets and this, which is why I'm so knowledgeable on the subject right now, because I just listened to an hour-long podcast about it. But they, basically a lot of these diets are based off of someone doing research somewhere. And if you look up that person and then you look up anti-diets, you find just as many research paper that's saying, the
That's
paleo
not good
diet is not
too.
as effective either.
I find it so interesting. I always say that I think that people's diets are based on where they were raised, because I was born in the Midwest. So like meat, potatoes, milk, like I can eat it all. But then like my friends from California that were raised like very clean diets, that eat kale, like a lot of them are gluten-free and like have, celiac or are, can't eat gluten, and like a lot, they don't like meat. And if they do, they get sick. And I'm like, are you genuinely actually sick from this? And it is probably because they maybe weren't exposed to it when they were younger. But I don't know if that's true. It's just funny.
We talk about this when we do the webinar for allergens, that a lot of people don't have allergies, they have sensitivities, and it might be because your body's not as good as breaking those things down.
Sure.
I mean, the common one people talk about is beans.
Yeah.
Some people can eat tons of things with beans in it and have no problems. Other people are going to float away. They get so gassy from it.
That's
so
crazy.
it just has to do with what's in your body.
Yeah.
And the thing that you take to help you if you have those problems are to help adjust your microflora so that you can better break them down. But like, I have two brothers. They're both lactose intolerant. I am not lactose intolerant.
So interesting.
So every time I go home, I'm like, let's get ice cream, because I'm from the Midwest too. And the best ice cream is around where I live.
Of course.
And so I'm like, let's get ice cream. They're like, we can't have ice cream. I'm like, no, I can.
Sorry. I know. Every time I go home to visit my grandpa, he pours me a big, huge glass of milk. And like anyone else I know, I'd be like, ugh. And I'm just like, pour it up.
Do you drink whole milk?
I don't really drink whole milk anymore. I mean, growing up, I think we did 2%, but now I'm like, I'll drink like 1% if I need, cream in my coffee. I don't drink milk as much anymore. I just don't crave it. But like when I was young, I'm like bowls of cereal and this and that. So
I grew up drinking whole milk, and now if I have whole milk, I'm like, this is like melted butter. It's so much. It's so thick.
But do you think it ties back to what you were introduced as a child, or no?
Potentially.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of your microflora in your gut is very closely related to your family or the people you live with. So if you have certain illnesses can wipe out your microflora, and the way that they replace that is by getting some microflora from people that you are near a lot. It doesn't always have to be your family. Sometimes it can be your roommate. Sometimes it can be your pets.
Whoa.
Because your microflora is so common between the people you're around.
So basically, I'm a walking kitten.
Yep. your stomach is very probably similar to your cat's, surprisingly. At least
She's a very clean cat, so I like this.
no cat is clean. They're all gross. Don't even say that.
Don't start with me.
Okay.
Long tangent. Let's get back to it.
She worked on the farm. She attended a black school 2 miles away from the cabin where she had grown up, where she dropped out to help her family when she was in the 6th grade. When she was 14 years old, she gave birth to her first son, Lawrence Lacks, which is very young.
Yes.
Yeah. And then she gave birth to her second child, Elsie Lacks. And both children were fathered by Day.
And Day was her cousin and also her husband.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, her cousin husband. Which it sounds awful, but I think was way
normal,
more common
yeah.
than, yeah. Elsie, her daughter, had epilepsy and cerebral palsy, and she was described as being different, deaf, and dumb by her family members. It's important later on in the story.
Okay, I have a question. Isn't that common if you're having children with your same genes? Like, isn't there some sort of mutation that happens?
In your children, there could be extra mutations.
Okay.
Generally, that takes a couple generations, though. That's when they talk about, like, the royals.
What's the word I'm trying to think of the word when you procreate with your...
Incest?
Yes. That's the word.
Yeah. Incest is typically a direct descendant, like a sibling or a parent.
Okay.
But like first cousins, like it's illegal in most places in the U.S. to marry your first cousin, but you can marry your second cousin.
All right.
Because apparently there's enough genetic differences there. You don't have to worry about that.
Go off, Henry.
I mean, I wouldn't. Okay, so in 1941, they get married and they move to Halifax County. And then later that year, their cousin, Fred Garrett, convinced the couple to leave the tobacco farm in Virginia and move to Turner Station, which is near Dundalk, Maryland, in Baltimore County.
Okay.
So that Day could stop working on the tobacco farms and start working for a steel company, which is way more money for them.
Okay.
Not long after they moved, Garrett was called, their cousin, was into World War II, and he gave them a bunch of savings when he left. And because of that, they were able to purchase a house in Turner Station. This is now part of Dundalk, where we talk now, and it was the largest African-American community in Baltimore County at the time.
Okay.
She had 3 more kids, David Sonny, Deborah Lacks, who's also very, really important, and Joseph Lacks, who eventually changed his name to Zachariah after he joined Islam. She gave birth to her last child at Johns Hopkins in 1950, and 4.5 months before she was diagnosed with cervical cancer.
Oh.
So when we talk about how fast cancer replicates,
Yeah.
Essentially 4.5 months, that's a very short period of time. It is unlikely that it occurred that fastly. She probably had cervical cancer already.
Yeah.
He talked about his birth being a miracle because he was fighting off the cancer cells growing all around him.
Oh, yikes. So they're married, they moved, they have 5 kids, then she gets cervical cancer.
Yes.
Okay.
At the same time that she starts to get cervical cancer, Elsie, the oldest daughter, is moved to asylum, essentially, and Henrietta visits her every week and takes care of her. Eventually, Elsie passed away, and we'll talk about why that's important later on. Okay, on January 29th, 1951, Lacks goes to Johns Hopkins, the only hospital in the area that would treat Black people, because she felt a knot in her womb, and that's under quotation marks. She previously had told her family that she had felt the knot, and they had rightly assumed that she was pregnant. So she had talked about this before.
Yeah.
They think, oh, it's the baby.
Pregnancy, yeah.
But after giving birth to Joseph, she had a lot of hemorrhaging, and the doctor said, you need to go and see something, which is very unusual. Normally, if they would do hemorrhaging, they would treat it immediately because that's not uncommon during birth. The fact that he said to go to Johns Hopkins and see a specialist led a lot of people to believe he saw something.
Yeah.
And he identified that this was unusual, and he probably thought it was cancer.
Okay.
There, the doctor, Howard Jones, takes a biopsy found on the mass in her cervix for laboratory testing, and soon after she was told that she had malignant cancer of her cervix. It was originally misdiagnosed, and it wasn't until 1970 that they actually identified what type of cancer it was.
So after she had passed?
After she had passed.
Okay.
But they don't think it was poor treatment of her. They think it was just a common misconception back then that there was the wrong type of cancer.
Got it.
She was treated with radium tube inserts, which is something I had never heard about, essentially. They put little tubes of radium inside of you that slowly releases radiation, and that's supposed to treat the cancer. And she was there for inpatient, and she was discharged a few days later with instructions to return for x-ray treatments and further things going on. During one of her treatments, 2 samples were taken from her cervix without her permission or without her knowledge. One sample was of healthy tissue, and the other was of the cancerous tissue. These samples were then sent to George Gay, who we talked about earlier, who was in charge of the cancer research at Johns Hopkins, and he was their lead cell culturist. And he was the one that originally identified that something was unique about these cells and what was going on with them. This cells eventually became part of the cell line and has made a huge change in biomedical research, and he called them the HeLa cells, which were HE for Henrietta, LA for Lacks.
Yep.
On August 8th, 1951, Lacks, who was 31 years old, went to Johns Hopkins for routine treatment and asked to be admitted because she had really bad abdominal pain. She received blood transfusion and remained in the hospital until her death on October 5th.
Oh.
Later on, there was a partial autopsy, and it showed that the cancer had metastasized throughout her body,
Okay.
which they had thought it would.
Yep.
I don't think they thought it would happen this fast, but it was. She was buried in an unmarked grave in a family cemetery in Clover, Virginia, and they called that area Lackstown because there were so many family members there. And they don't know where she was exactly buried, but they believe it was within feet of her mother's gravesite. And it was her mother's gravesite was the only one there that actually had a tombstone for decades. In 2010, someone who was working with the family, who started a school of medicine because of Henrietta Lacks, was working with several family members, and George Gay, the original scientist, donated a headstone for her. This prompted the family to raise money for a headstone for Elsie, who had recently passed away too, or had passed away not long after her mother. Okay. And they both donated them at the same time. On her gravestone reads, Henrietta Lacks, August 1st, 1920 to October 4th, 1951, in loving memory of a phenomenal woman, wife and mother who touched the lives of memory. Here lies Henrietta Lacks, HeLa. Her immortal cells will continue to help mankind forever. Eternal love and admiration from your family.
Oh my
So
gosh.
that's the story of Henrietta Lacks in her lifetime.
Yes.
Her cells lived on longer, and what happened with them is really important because it never affected her family. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yes.
A lot about that. Actually, most of my pages are talking about what happened to her after her death, which is crazy because that's not normally how our stories go.
Right.
Okay, so after her death, they discover these cells. They see that there's something weird about them. They start sending them out. He has one of his members, his assistants, go to her autopsy and take additional cells, and that's where they originally used the cells that are used now, those cells. What's really scary is they were using these cells for months already and already figured out how important they were.
Yeah.
His assistant goes and takes the cells, and one of the things she's commented is she notices that her toenails are painted, and she's like, it's the first time that she associated that these cells came from a person.
Whoa.
Which is crazy because, like, I know working in a lab, I forget that some of the stuff I work with comes from someone or comes from something else because I'm looking at a petri dish and they don't look like anybody. They don't look like anything.
Yeah.
So that was like one of the first times. And that's one of the first things that kind of kicks off this whole, we have to do something about this.
Yeah. The thing I'm trying to wrap my head around is that you're describing these cells as immortal. And like all of us know that we're not immortal. And I've never heard of this before. And it doesn't sound like it's happened since. Do you have any other ways to describe so we can kind of wrap our brain around what that means?
Sure. I don't know if it's not happened since. I think there's probably other immortal lines. This was just the first one, and it's probably the most critical one that we've ever done research on.
Okay.
Immortal essentially means that these cells have no signal in them that causes them to auto-destruct.
Okay.
That process is called apoptosis or apoptosis. I grew up in the Midwest, and I had a scientific teacher who told me apoptosis, so I called it apoptosis forever until I heard someone pronounce it differently, and I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Like, that can't be it. She also said there's a part of your cell called the centriole, and she used to say centriole. And so that's how I said it until I was doing like some defense work and someone corrected me and I was like, no, that can't be right. Hundreds of people have heard me say citrioli.
Yeah.
Like, you can't tell me I've been mispronouncing it now. Turns out I was.
There's a lot of words that I say oddly from being from Minnesota, and then in California they're like, can you say that again? Or I'll literally be in an elevator and I'll say something and they're like, are you from Minnesota? And I'm like, why? Can you tell by the way that I talk? That's funny. Okay, but tying back to the immortal cells, do you think it's like, let's say somebody was made up of immortal cells, then would they essentially be immortal? Or like, is this a good thing or a bad thing?
It could be a good thing if your cells were to be immortal in a controlled system. And actually there's, we'll talk about media references. There is a book and a TV show based off of someone who is immortal, and they are saying it's basically the same thing that happened to her cells.
Okay.
Unfortunately, what happens is your cells divide and they make a perfect copy of themselves. They get real big. They make a perfect copy of everything in them, and they split down the middle, and then you have two daughter cells. So one cell becomes two cells become four become eight, and that's basically how all your cells in your body work, except for your cells that are used for sex. Those cells are limited in how many times they can do that. And at a certain point, they signal that they're dying or they just die off. The immortal cell lines don't do this.
Yeah.
They do this forever and they go on and on and on. And as long as they have the conditions and nutrients they need to live, so they have to have, energy, water, the right temperature. I mean, they would die if you put them in like an oven. They're not going to live forever. They'll continue to replicate.
Wow.
And these ones specifically replicate crazy fast.
Okay.
Human cells can take days to go through the full process. HeLa cells can take like 24 hours.
Wow.
So he went from having a piece of a tumor to having tons and tons of petri dishes. And when they talk about this company that did profit a lot off of them, they were making 6 trillion of these cells a day. That's how fast they were replicating.
Wow.
And they were making tons of money off of this.
I don't know why I'm tying this back to like skincare. There's like certain things that make you, like they say they make your cells turn over faster so your skin can look newer or fresher. And I'm like, how can I put this into like skincare so we can all use it?
Some of the facial treatments they do, they remove the outer layer, which makes you look kind of rough for a few days. But it also signals the cells that are deep to say like, oh, something happened. We need to make more cells. Like when you cut yourself, those cells go into really fast production and more cells move into there so they can fill in that cut kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And it's basically, that's what it does. And it makes those cells come alive again, or not come alive again, or get a little bit of boost. And that's what makes people's skin look better and stuff like that.
Okay. I just had microneedling done, so it's nice to hear the science behind it.
Yes.
And like, okay, this is working. That's why I look so good today.
Yeah, beautiful. And it's all science. Like it's really hard to prove any of this, and some of it works better for some and some of it works better for others. A lot of problems with skincare is they talk about like, oh, it gets into your skin. Normally those molecules are so big, it does not get into your skin. It's not getting into those deep layers. A lot of it has to be like injected and stuff like that to really cause some things. Not that it's not impossible, but it's not there.
Okay.
But like if you were to have immortal cell lines that grew controlled, you could live a lot longer. And that is actually research they do on death. Is like, how do we keep these cells from signaling that they're ready to die?
Yep.
Or what's causing these cells to signal? Can we slow that down or anything? However, we want to make sure that they don't grow out of control, because then you have tumors.
Yes.
And then so like, oh, you have an immortal cell line, but you're just a big blob.
Yeah.
Which I'm 100% sure there are movies based off of. Yeah. I guess The Blob. I mean, that's an immortal cell line that just grows and grows and grows, and it has no shape or form.
Okay.
One's an alien, I guess. Whatever. You get the idea.
That's what I kept thinking. When you're like immortal, I'm like, what can I tie this back to? I don't know why I kept thinking like, you're just a walking alien.
Yeah, this is a walking alien. It should be said that the scientists from Johns Hopkins really didn't make any money off of this. It was the people that gave the cells that made a lot of money. They made a lot of money off their research. That research probably became a drug that pharmaceutical companies made off of. The scientists at Johns Hopkins probably did not.
Okay.
So they collect her cells. That was the first time they kind of identify like, hey, this is a living person. And it kind of starts to snowball from there, but it takes a long time. One of the things that they use, this is really important, is Jonas Salk, who is the one who made the polio vaccine, uses these cells, and they are just like any other cell, so they take up the virus of polio very quickly and start replicating it, and he's able to develop the vaccine for that one.
Wow.
So that's probably one of the biggest medical things, because people were dying from polio, and if you didn't die, you were probably in an iron lung or in a wheelchair, which happens fairly often. This is one of the things that basically changed the world because of these cells.
Okay.
They were put into demand for mass production, and because of that mass production, they were used all over the world. And like I said earlier, research for cancer, AIDS, radiation and toxic substances are used on them. Drug treatments are used on them. Gene mapping, which is huge. We'll do an episode about that one day.
Yeah.
And they have countless other purposes. There are almost 11,000 patents involving HeLa cells.
Wow.
Yeah. This is where the family gets involved.
Okay.
In 1970s, so this is 20 years after she passed, and 20 years after they discovered the cells, a large portion of other cells become contaminated by HeLa, and this is causing companies hundreds of millions of dollars. And the reason is these cells are super, super resistant to everything.
Okay.
And they're lighter than air. These cells are teeny tiny. So they can get in air, they can move across your skin, they can move across surfaces, and so they're infecting all these other cultures. So these people are using HeLa cells for research, now have HeLa cells in their other samples and their other things they're working with. And the HeLa cells grow so fast that they're choking out the other cells.
Whoa. Okay.
But when you look at them under a microscope, it's not easy to tell what's HeLa and what's not HeLa.
Yeah.
So as a result, scientists start reaching out to her family to get blood samples because they want to be able to test genetic markers against the cells that they have to find out
if they're hers or not.
Yes.
Okay.
This is because George Gay passed away, the man who originally identified him. And after he passed away, they published an article in oncology magazines basically saying Henrietta Lacks' name.
Yeah.
And that's the first time they ever said her name. She'd been referenced before, but they called her, I think it was a different name, like Helen something, but like same letters, but it was wrong. And they don't know if they called her that mistakenly or they called her that to
protect her privacy, sure.
But they weren't really protecting her privacy because she was already passed away. And they weren't treating her with any respect anyway because they weren't giving any money. So they think, some people think it was an accident. Other people think it was not giving credit where credit was due and trying to hide it.
Okay.
But after he passes away, there's an article published that says her name, and that's one of the first times it's ever published, and people take that and say, we have a problem. It's causing us hundreds of millions of dollars because these cells are everywhere. They're great at growing, too good at growing. And they just don't know. Okay. And actually, when I worked in the lab and I worked with HeLa cells, we had that problem too. We would have HeLa cells and we would like come back and be like, uh-oh, something's wrong with this culture. And they would have HeLa cells in it. And we were working in very specific conditions.
That's crazy.
I had a gown up when I worked with them. You had to put on like, they call it a little bunny suit. It's like a full suit. And you worked with them and you took all that off so you didn't take any of the HeLa cells with you. And we would still get them in other labs.
That is insane to think about.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, what if the cells got something bad in it, and then if it was carrying like a disease of some sort, could that spread that disease? Like, I don't know why I'm thinking like COVID, like how did that spread? I don't know.
No, not really, because they are specific cells that have to have, in order to grow in a human body, they needed to get to certain things. So like if you ate them, it would be okay. Not that I would encourage you to eat them. If you breathed them in, it wouldn't hurt you because they're not growing in that part of your body.
Got it.
And they did get mutations. There's lots of HeLa cell lines, some with those specific mutations and some of them without mutations, so they can see what's going on with them. Okay. So I worked with a HeLa cell line that had a knockout gene in it, which means that it had a gene that we knocked out of it so that it didn't do certain functions. And basically what I did with those is we infected them with HPV, and then we watched the cells, and then we would purposely burst the cells at a certain point and try to isolate the viral proteins. And we were trying to identify what of these proteins are critical for the virus to spread. So if we can stop that protein, can we stop the spread of the virus?
Sure.
Which is what the vaccine does.
Whoa. So much science.
And and I was very young at the time, so I was just like every day like feeding a culture and rocking it back and forth and talking to my little cells. And then later on I was like, what am I doing? Oh, okay. Okay, so they start reaching out to the family and they want to get genetics testing for them. And they ask for blood testing, but they don't tell them why. And so the family's very concerned. And one of them, people tell the oldest daughter that the reason they're testing is to see if she has the same type of cells that her mother had. Which they are looking for the same type of cells because they want to identify them. She thinks that they're afraid she has the same type of cancer cells.
Yes, that's what I would have thought too.
So they take the cells, they never reach out to her. So she lives for a long time.
Living in fear.
Yes, but this is something that raised some flags for them. So they start kind of researching. So not like years and years, but she had months where she was like, what's going on? Why do these people want my blood?
Yeah.
In 1975, so I guess years, because in 1970 is when they start reaching out. So about 5 years, the family also learned through a chance dinner party conversation that material originating from Henrietta Lacks was continuing to be used for medical research. So articles were published with their mother's names. They weren't seeing this, but it came up randomly in a conversation.
Wow.
And they're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
My grandmother or my mother's cells, my mother's still alive. That's her cells. Yeah. It's not her, but it's her cells. And prior to this, they've never discussed her illness or her death amongst themselves. So they were just like, she passed away. Yeah. They moved on. One thing that we'll mention her a little bit is the older brother married a woman named Babette, and she really stepped up and she took care of the family as kind of a mother figure. And she didn't even know everything. So she steps in to take care of the family after Henrietta passes away, but she doesn't know everything that's going on here.
Yeah.
At the time, Henrietta Lacks or her family had never given permission for them to take these cells or for them to use them, but at the time it wasn't required.
I was going to say, when you started saying that they were posting her name, I was like, nowadays HIPAA would have came in and you obviously can't share that information publicly.
No.
That didn't exist then.
No. So in the 1980s, their records are published without family consent, but a similar issue was brought up in 1990 in the Supreme Court of California that ruled that a person's discarded tissues and cells are not their property and can be commercialized. So if you've passed away or you've discarded those cells, they are no longer your property.
But, okay, so like if you're an organ donor, you sign that off that you can, but is that still?
That's done while you're living. But they're not on your property once they're given away. You don't have a choice in who gets your organs or anything like that.
Whoa.
So it is,
okay.
And it is often discussed how right or wrong this is.
Yeah. But nowadays, if you say that you don't want to be an organ donor, they can't take anything
because you're not discarding it.
Okay.
So in this case, they're discarding it.
Okay.
But she also didn't give them permission to take the cells to discard.
Right.
So it's like, well, okay, one thing's not right here. Something else happened. In 2013, researchers published the DNA sequence of the genome of a strain of HeLa cells. And the Lacks family discovered this when an author, Rebecca Skloot, informed them. Rebecca Skloot is writing a book and several articles that come up, and she reaches out to them to get more story to write the book. And this is the first time anyone's reached out to them and talked to them about it. So there was objection from the Lacks family about genetic information that was available for public access. One of her grandchildren, Jerry, said to the New York Times, the biggest concern was privacy. What information was going to be out there about our grandmother, and what information can they obtain from her sequencing that will tell them about her children and grandchildren and down the line? The same year, another genome was published by the National Institute of Health, the NIH, and they actually reached out in 2013, and an agreement was made between the family that gave the family some control over this.
Okay.
So
there's books being written about her and her. Okay.
Yes. They put 2 family members on a board of 6 to help decide what they're going to use this research for and what's getting published.
Okay.
So this is the first time they start getting out there. And in 2021, it's not that long ago, the Lacks family filed a lawsuit against Thermo Fisher Scientific for proliferating the HeLa cell line and all of the things they did for it. And they asked for the full amount of Thermo Fisher's net profits, which was a lot of money to ask for.
Yeah.
But this was not settled until July 31st, 2023, and Thermo Fisher Scientific settled with the Lacks family on undisclosed terms.
So we don't waiting to hear the dollar
I know.
amount.
I was like desperate to find it. Could not find it anywhere. I'm sure it's very good.
Yeah.
But one of the things that they talk about is when they first start hearing about this, the family is struggling to pay for, I believe it's the husband's wife, Babette's, cancer treatment. So there's cancer treatments that are derived from
her grandma
that she cannot afford.
Actually, it's in her line, and she can't even pay for it.
Yes, and they're struggling with finding good housing situations.
Yeah.
They're struggling, but
they
many
have the
people
bare minimum, and they're the reason we have all these cures and all these vaccines.
Yes,
that's devastating.
Crazy. But eventually they do get some sort of settlement from Thermo Fisher. Thermo Fisher is gigantic. This was also a huge news thing. And it was there's movies made about this, and we'll talk about that in a second here. So I'm sure
they're doing okay.
They're doing okay.
In
now.
terms of from the lens of Thermo Fisher, do you think that they knew that the cells they were using hadn't been approved to be used? It's been so many years.
They very much knew that they were not getting any credit for it.
Okay.
Because at this time, when they got the lawsuit, the movies and the stuff had already come out, and all this information was already there.
Got it.
Okay, let's talk about some recognition. I have a few of these, and we'll go through them kind of quickly.
Okay.
The Morehouse School of Medicine held its first annual HeLa Women's Health Conference, and this was led by physician Roland Patilio, and he was the one who bought the headstones for the family.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yes. He talks about the valuable contribution made by African Americans to medical research and clinical practice. And we've talked about this specifically with Tuskegee. This is, so much of our medical world was built on the backs of women, people of color, African Americans, minorities.
The less fortunate.
And they don't get any credit for this. And they're often abused in the process of it. And this is one of those cases, obviously. The mayor of Atlanta declared the date of October 11th, 1996, Henrietta Lacks Day. There's a yearly conference called at Turner Station where they basically celebrate her contributions. U.S. Congressman presented a congressional resolution recognizing Lacks and her contributions to medical science and research. In 2010, Johns Hopkins Institutes for Clinical and Transactional Research established an annual Henrietta Lacks Memorial Lecture Series, which goes on to this day. And it talks about the global impact of HeLa in medical and research.
Okay.
Morgan State University granted Lacks a posthumous honorary doctorate in public service. A school is named after her in Vancouver, Washington. There's so many of these, which is good, but it's also I want to talk about
a little
these.
Too late.
Yeah. She was introduced to the Maryland Women's Hall of Fame in 2017. And also in 2014, she was the Hall of Fame. In 2017, a minor planet was named after her. 359426 Lacks.
You said that like you were going off to space.
Yes. I was like, I better write. I like wrote it down and I was like, this is important. I don't know if it really was. The New York Times in 2018 published a belated obituary for her as part of a special project they were doing. In 2019, a National Portrait Gallery and National Museum of African American History and Culture announced the ascension of a portrait of Lacks by Kadar Nelson, which is the photo I sent you earlier today.
Okay.
That photo is kind of a big deal. Behind her are the cells of life. That's the pattern behind her. Yep. Her dress pattern is actual pictures of cells.
Oh, wow.
And she's missing 2 buttons on her dress to represent the 2 cultures that were taken from her without her permission.
Okay, we'll share the photo, but she's a young lady. She has a red dress on. I didn't pay attention to the back, so interesting.
But it's a huge portrait,
yeah,
and it's kind of a big deal. They've named, in 2018, Johns Hopkins named a research building in honor of her. So Johns Hopkins, I think, is doing its due diligence.
For sure.
They've recognized that this was bad. They were also one of the first hospitals to treat African Americans. So I think they're kind of going back now and trying to say, like, we recognize this. We didn't do enough. We want to do more.
Yeah.
In 2020, she was indoctrinated to the National Women's Hall of Fame. 2019, she was enhancing cancer research. She was given awards for that one. Where am my fun story? In 2021, WHO presented her an award, and the chief scientist of WHO said, "I cannot think of any other single cell line or lab reagent that's been used to this extent and resulted in so many advances."
Wow.
Kind of huge.
WHO, people who don't know, stands for World Health Organization.
Yes.
So big deal.
Yes.
Okay.
It's their World Health.
Yes.
So it's kind of a big deal.
Yes.
In 2022, when they were talking about all the Confederate statues that were removed, one of them was replaced with a statue of Henrietta.
Okay.
And that was kind of a huge deal.
Yeah.
And she's a ton in pop culture. To this day, there's a debate on how she was treated and how her cells were used have to do with her race or not, because people say this was used for a lot of people, but Henrietta's cells were the ones that were used for this.
Yeah.
And her family definitely did not benefit from everything that was going on right now. She has tons of articles and stories published about her. There was a documentary called The Way of All Flesh from BBC in 1998. Rebecca Skloot was the one we talked about earlier, published 2 articles in 2001, and she wrote a book called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks.
Oh.
Skloot worked with Deborah Lacks, who was one of the daughters, who was determined to learn more about her mother on the book. She used the first royalty check from the book to start the Henrietta Lacks Foundation, which has provided funds like college tuition and medical procedures to the Henrietta family.
Oh, that's
Rebecca
amazing.
Skloot is a cool person. She did really good things with us, at least as far as I know from everything I've read. If she's canceled, don't. I didn't know about it. You don't know me.
But when you're talking about the other daughter that passed away that was in the insane asylum, I don't think we ever circled back.
I forgot to go back to it. She visited her daughter every week. When she passed away, she was never visited again. No one knows why and went there. And after she had passed away, because she used to go and check on her daughter and her treatment and everything, they did some potentially unethical studies to help treat her. And she passed away like 2 years later. And the family didn't know about it until they started doing this research in 1970.
Sad. So now that the mom wasn't like checking in on her, they basically used her for science.
Yeah. I don't know if they used her for science. They did a procedure on her that I think was still being studied, basically to help treat her brain, but it wasn't, like, they don't do that study anymore.
Yeah.
And so and that eventually probably led to her demise. But they never reached out to her family. They never reached out to anyone. And Deborah, when she was researching this for the book, she wanted to find her sister, and that's when she found out.
I can't imagine.
Yeah. So
because I forget that you said the siblings were all, spread out. They weren't together, so that the communication was probably tough then too.
And they do this. There's some videos and stuff I watched with the daughter, and she said, "Everyone knows so much about my mother and her genetics and our genetics. I want to know what my mom smelled like." Which is so sad.
Yeah.
So there's these videos of her going to the hospitals and stuff where they talk about it, and they give her HeLa cells to look at and like touch for the first time, and it's like some of the only memories she has of her mother because she doesn't remember much.
Because the mom passed away when the kids were very young. Yeah, there was 10 of them. Okay.
So the last son was only, I think, when the mom passed away would have been just around a year.
Oh wow.
And so they're all born very close together, and she was only in her 30s when she passed away, so they were very young. Okay, in 2010, HBO announced that Oprah Winfrey and Alan Ball were developing a film project based on the book, and in 2016, filming commenced. with Winfrey playing Deborah, Henrietta's daughter. The film came out in 2017, and it was attended by all the family members. And there's still some debate whether how much of the family members, some of the family members and grandchildren don't like how much they talk about the family. Yeah. Some of them are into it, and they support it and they want to talk about it. And it's a cross because some people are like, we were abused for this, and they hate that. And other people say like, but we've done so much, and it's her legacy is huge.
What was the name of the movie?
The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. Okay. It's also the book, and if you haven't read it, you should read it. It's really, really good.
Yeah, I'm very interested.
And it is basically her story told from her daughter trying to find out her story.
Okay.
There is a Law and Order episode based off of this called Immortal. And people have said how closely it resembles the story, and that's kind of scary. I haven't watched that one, which is weird because I watched all Law and Order.
Yeah.
It's my favorite TV show. And members of the family were able to tell their story for the first time in 2013 when their oldest son and wife, Lawrence and Babette, released a short digital memoir called HeLa Family Stories, Lawrence and Babette. And they were firsthand accounts of what they remember of their mother and what happened after she passed away and how they found out about her cells being used for everything. There are several books that are based off the science, and they talk, and she's referenced specifically on it. We talked about the one where there is a man who is immortal, and they say it's because of the same gene that happened in Henrietta Lacks. They talk about that specifically. And they talk about how this is used in the future to basically set the lights of body autonomy.
Sure.
A Netflix original movie mentions her called Project Power, in 2020. And they talk about research using her cells.
Whoa. I need to look up all of these shows and movies. I want to watch them now.
And there are several songs with one of them that I thought we could live forever like Henrietta Lacks cells. Which is a lyric I thought was really cute.
Aww.
But that is the story of Henrietta Lacks and her immortal cell line, HeLa cells.
Wow, that was so intriguing. Usually we end on a story that's like really sad, and of course this is sad, but also so much has come from it.
Yeah, and I think it does have kind of a good ending because the family does get there. Oh, one other thing is there are people who were talking in an interview that when COVID was first coming out, they obviously know the John Hopkins still works very closely with the family. When COVID was coming out and they were talking about the virus, a member of the family called John Hopkins and said, "Henrietta's got this, right? What is Henrietta doing to help us?" Which is so cool.
Yeah.
Like to say like, oh, what's my grandmother doing right now?
Exactly.
How is she helping?
Is she saving?
And she did. And she contributed to both the vaccines, or the major ones.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. That was a great story.
Thank you. And thank you, Henrietta.
Yes. You go, girl.
Yeah, she's the best.
Okay, cool. Well, should we hop into our What Are We Eating segment?
Yes.
Okay. This is where we talk about what we're consuming, whether it's pop culture, food, anything else that we're consuming.
Brittany.
Okay.
What are you consuming?
Well, it's the holiday season. So first of all, deep diving into like shopping guides, just getting all my Christmas presents together. But I'm planning a little surprise. I'm taking my boyfriend back to where we're from, and he has a huge Christmas present, which I cannot say, but I will say next episode because I'm sure you will listen and find out. But I've been planning that. What about you?
So I am a Luddite, and I've had the same iPhone for like ever. And I just got my iPhone upgraded, which I was like, yay, I have a new iPhone. Yeah. Little did I know in like the time that I've gone from having a 12 to like a 16, everything has changed. And so
you're like, oh, what is this?
I had to go out and buy all new cables.
Yep.
I
all
got
the plugins are different.
All the plugins are different.
Okay.
We traveled out yesterday. I got my new phone on Monday.
Okay.
So I have been like running around trying to get everything together. And then I'm like, okay, I have my phone. Somehow I don't know how to work it. Like I was like, I just want to turn the sound off. And like I just needed to like this. And so I've been like having to watch videos and like trying to write stories and pull things together and be prepared for things and then be like, but I can't do any of this because I can't get my phone to go on silent mode. And
technical difficulties.
It is terrifying to think that I'm becoming my family members that like don't know how to like text or don't know how to like turn
You're like, Grandpa, I sent you a photo a week ago. Did you get it?
Yes. Oh, I have like texted my mom like, and months later she's like, oh, that's a cool photo. And I'm like, that was like from July. So I'm like, I'm becoming that person. So now I'm looking up and like trying to study and get better at those kind of things.
Keep up on the technology. Okay, well, in terms of consuming things, do you have any holiday traditions that your family eats or does during the holidays?
Okay, so my mom is Mexican. We've talked about this before.
Yes.
And one of the things we make is pozole.
Oh, I love pozole.
And-
I, for some reason, thought you were going to say tamales.
But we make pozole.
Okay.
You make pozole. Everyone comes eats pozole, and then you make tamales.
Okay.
And then you make enough tamales to last you 6 or 7 years.
Yes.
Like, but I'm not going home this year, so I'm doing all these traditions with new friends and new family and stuff.
That's fun.
And I know how to make pozole. I don't know how to make tamales because
Mom.
my mom doesn't either because we learned from my grandmother, and my grandmother measured by saying like about that much.
Yeah.
Or like my grandma would say like about half a palm or like half an eggshell. I'm like, what does that mean? Yeah. So now I'm going through this process of like making batches and being like, these are great or like these aren't good. And so far a lot of them have not been good.
Okay.
They've been edible.
Keep trying.
But I also don't know how to
this.
make any food in small quantities because
Yeah.
I have a bigger family. So when I make food, I'm like, oh, I'm making this for 14 people. And when
You
it's
just
just
have
like
to give it
me
to-
and 2 friends
send
who are
it
like
with your
helping
friends.
mom, I'm like pawning them off. But then if they don't taste good, I'm like, sorry.
Yeah.
So when we go back, I'm going to make pozole and have a bunch of friends come over and do that one because I've never done that with people. So I'm going to start my own little tradition of doing pozole.
Perfect.
I make red pozole. If you eat green pozole, you're a psycho.
Okay. I've only had red, I think.
Okay,
So
good.
for the record. But yeah, our tradition, my grandpa always makes oyster stew. And like a lot of people don't like oysters and it sounds weird, but I always look forward to my grandpa's oyster stew. And the last 2 years I wasn't able to make it back, but this year we're going. So I'm like calling Grandpa, make sure and get the oysters.
Oyster stew does not sound like a Midwest thing though. That
I know,
sounds like
no,
East Coast.
I know that's so true. I don't know where we never ate a lot of seafood. My dad fishes a lot, so we eat a lot of fish, but I have no idea how that became a tradition. And I've never had it. I've never even heard of oyster stew even on a menu anywhere, but my grandpa makes it. It's like, it's so incredible. I don't even know how to describe it, but there's big juicy oysters and it's like broth based and I put a bunch of crackers in it and it's just like, you know, you're waiting for Santa and I'm like at the table eating my oyster stew. I don't know why.
I have a
That's why we say traditions.
Critical food safety question.
Okay.
In the Midwest, where are you getting fresh oysters?
I don't know if they're fresh. He goes to like the market where you get the meat and they have oysters there. So I'm assuming they're flown in, but I don't know.
So suspicious.
I
don't know if I can participate
this.
in your oyster stew thing.
But okay, also funny, I don't like oysters like in the half shell, so I don't eat oysters that way, but I like them in the can, you know, like the oysters that are the canned oysters with the oil. I will literally just take them out and put them on crackers. And anyone who's ever seen me eat that are like, what are you doing?
That's gas station food. I don't know what to tell you.
I don't know. Funny traditions. But yeah, the holidays bring weird things out.
I guess so.
Okay. Sounds good.
I don't know if I can get behind oysters too.
Okay, fine.
I'll support you, but I don't know if I'm going to be there for the dinner.
Okay. This year I'm going to get the recipe so I can make it and maybe someday I'll make it for you.
Okay, good. We'll try it.
Awesome. Well, I think that wraps up our episode.
Yes, we're all done for this one. And
Okay.
now we got to see how the video turns out.
Okay. Well, if you guys enjoyed this episode, please go like and subscribe and give us a review.
And listen to us and talk to us and send it to your friends.
I know. You said a funny joke when we started this podcast, and I can't remember how you said it, but it was like the way that you told people to give us a review. It was like, if you have something nice to say.
Yeah, I don't want any negative reviews. 5 stars, 5 stars only. We don't take critiques. I'm looking only for support. One of the things I do for work is I publish a lot of articles, and I started to read like the comments people put on them. And I was like, well, never do that again. Never doing that again. So I'm only looking for nice articles.
Okay.
I'll take 4 stars, 4 to 5 stars.
Awesome. Well, thanks for listening, you guys. We'll catch up next month.
Yep, sounds good. Have a good one.
Okay.
Bye. This has been Okay, But Why? A Microbac Laboratories podcast. Microbac Laboratory operates the largest network of privately held testing facilities in the United States, providing broad analytical offerings and testing insights across the environmental, food, and life science markets.
A company with more than 50 years experience honing its craft, Microbac is on a mission to improve the world around us one test at a time.
To learn more about Microbac, testing services, and this podcast, please visit microbac.com.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Your support means the world to us. If you want to stay updated on all of our latest episodes, make sure to follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you enjoyed today's show, leave us a review. Thank you.
Yeah!